It was the summer of 1990, and the basketball world existed in a particular kind of tension that only happens when two different definitions of greatness occupy the same era at the same time. Magic Johnson had spent the entire decade of the 80s redefining what a basketball player could be. He had taken the point guard position and expanded it into something that had no real precedent. A 6'9" orchestrator who could see the entire court as if from above, who made his teammates better simply by being present, whose joy in the game was so visible and so infectious that it changed the emotional atmosphere of every building he entered. 5 championships, 3 MVP awards, a smile that had become as iconic as any trophy. Magic Johnson was not just a basketball player. He was the living argument that basketball at its highest level was a collective art form, that the most beautiful version of the game was the version where everyone was elevated together. Michael Jordan had spent that same decade building an entirely different argument. He was 27 years old in the summer of 1990, in the absolute physical peak of what would become the most decorated individual career in the history of the sport. He had already won 4 consecutive scoring titles. He had already produced performances that made people who watched basketball for a living struggle to find adequate language. But he had not yet won a championship. And in the particular calculus of basketball greatness, that absence was used by certain voices to create a ceiling above his legacy. The argument went that individual brilliance without collective success was ultimately insufficient, that the game rewarded teams, not solo performers, and that Jordan, for all his extraordinary gifts, had not yet demonstrated that he could be what Magic had been, which was the center of something that won. The two men had a relationship that was built on mutual respect and a particular kind of competitive awareness that exists only between players who recognize in each other a version of greatness they cannot find anywhere else. They had been friendly in the way that elite competitors are friendly, warmly, genuinely, but with an undercurrent of permanent evaluation that neither of them could fully turn off because it was too deeply wired into who they were. Every time they shared a court, even in exhibition settings, even in All-Star weekends, something real was happening beneath the surface, something that both of them felt and neither of them needed to verbalize. The charity event that summer was organized by a foundation connected to youth basketball programs in Los Angeles. It was the kind of event that happened regularly in that era, bringing together NBA stars for exhibition games and community appearances, raising money for good causes while giving fans an opportunity to see the players they loved in a slightly less formal context. Several of the biggest names in basketball were there. The event was held at a mid-sized arena in Los Angeles that seated about 8,000 people, and it was sold out weeks in advance not because of the charitable mission, but because people understood that when you put that collection of talent in one building, something unscripted was likely to happen. The exhibition game itself was entertaining in the way those games always were, competitive enough to be watchable, but relaxed enough that players were visibly enjoying themselves. Magic was in his element, running the floor, making no-look passes that drew gasps from the crowd, playing with the kind of exuberant generosity that made everyone around him perform better. Jordan was doing what Jordan did even in low-stakes settings, which was compete with a seriousness that never fully went away regardless of the context. He had scored 22 points by the end of the game and had made it look almost casual, which was itself a kind of statement. What happened after the final buzzer was not planned. That was the part that everyone who was there would emphasize in the years that followed. It was not organized, not arranged, not part of the program. It grew out of something spontaneous that nobody could have scripted because it depended on a specific combination of mood and moment and competitive instinct that could not be manufactured in advance. Magic was near half-court after the game ended, talking to a group of people that included several former players and a few journalists who had been granted floor access. He was relaxed, laughing, still in the glow of the exhibition. Someone in the group, the exact identity varies depending on who tells the story, made a comment about how the game had ended with Jordan scoring more points than Magic, and suggested half-jokingly that the real question nobody had answered was what would happen if they went one-on-one. It was the kind of comment that gets made in those settings constantly and almost always dissolves into laughter without consequence. But something about the way Magic heard it that evening, the particular combination of competitive energy still circulating in his body, and the audience present and the specific phrasing of the challenge, made him do something different. Instead of laughing it off, he looked across the court to where Jordan was talking with a small group near the bench. And he said loudly enough for several people nearby to hear that he thought that was actually a good question. Jordan heard it. The court was not large enough, and the post-game noise had settled enough that the comment carried. He looked over at Magic with an expression that people who witnessed it described as perfectly neutral, which for Jordan was itself a form of communication. A few seconds passed. Then Jordan held up one finger, meaning, "Give me a minute," finished the conversation he was having, and walked toward half-court. Within 4 minutes, what had been a private exchange between two players and a small group of bystanders had become the organizing event of the entire arena. The building had not emptied. People had been milling around, taking photographs, waiting for autograph opportunities. But word traveled with the speed that only exists in contained spaces where everyone is paying attention. And within those 4 minutes, virtually everyone in the arena had found a place where they could see what was happening on the court. The 8,000 people who had paid to see a charity exhibition were about to witness something that nobody had charged them extra for and nobody had promised them. Something that existed purely because two of the most competitive human beings on the planet had been put in the same building on the right evening. There were no formal rules announced. No referee was found. Someone produced a ball. The understanding, communicated entirely through implication, was that they would play to a number, make it take it, and that whatever happened would be witnessed by everyone present and remembered by everyone present, and that was the only structure the moment required. Magic won the tip, or rather, he simply caught the ball first when it was tossed up, which was the closest thing to a formal opening. He came down the court with that distinctive stride, upright, unhurried, reading the situation in front of him with the court vision that had defined his career. Jordan was guarding him in a stance that anyone who had watched the Bulls play would have recognized immediately. Low, weight balanced, hands active, eyes locked on Magic's midsection rather than his hands or the ball, reading the body rather than the fakes. Magic made the first move with his left hand, a long dribble that was designed to test Jordan's lateral quickness and establish a benchmark for what he was working with defensively. Jordan stayed with it easily, not spectacularly, just correctly, his feet moving with the kind of economical precision that never looked impressive until you understood how rarely it was done at that level. Magic reset, tried a crossover that was genuinely excellent, got a half step and went to the basket. Jordan recovered and got a piece of the shot. The ball rattled around and came out. Magic recovered it and scored on the putback. 1-0 Magic. Jordan came down with the ball, and the crowd, which had been buzzing with excitement, went noticeably quieter. Not silent, but the register changed. Because watching Michael Jordan with the ball in a one-on-one setting was a different experience from watching him in a team game. In a team game, the defense had help. There were rotations, there were weak-side defenders, there were systems designed to prevent him from getting exactly what he wanted. Here, there was nothing between him and the basket except the best defensive player of his generation, and the crowd understood with a collective intelligence that something was about to happen that had no precedent in their experience as fans. Jordan dribbled twice near the three-point line, reading Magic in exactly the same way Magic had read him, looking at the body, not the eyes. Magic was in a good stance, not reaching, not overcommitting, exactly the right defensive posture. Jordan jab-stepped right, and Magic absorbed it without moving his feet, which was the correct response. Jordan nodded almost imperceptibly, which was an acknowledgement that Magic had answered correctly. Then Jordan went left off the dribble, slow enough that Magic could follow, and stopped at 15 feet. Magic had his hand in Jordan's face perfectly. Jordan made the jumper anyway. The crowd made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and applause, a release of held breath transformed into noise, 1-1. They played for approximately 25 minutes, no timeouts, no interruptions, no coaching from the sidelines, though several coaches were present and visibly wanted to say something. The 8,000 people in that arena were completely still in a way that almost never happens in a basketball setting, where crowd noise is a constant feature of the environment. At several points during those 25 minutes, you could hear the sound of sneakers on the hardwood as clearly as if the building were empty. The silence was not the silence of boredom. It was the silence of people who understood they were watching something that required their complete attention and that any noise they made would be an intrusion. What unfolded in those 25 minutes was not a rout. That was the first thing that everyone who was there emphasized when they described it afterward. Magic Johnson was one of the most gifted basketball players who had ever lived, and he competed in that moment with everything he had. He scored. He made shots that were genuinely difficult. He used his size advantage, 6'9" against 6'6", intelligently and effectively. There were stretches where he was magnificent, where his passing instincts expressed themselves even in a one-on-one context through the quality of his decision-making, through the way he manipulated Jordan's positioning with pump fakes and hesitations that were masterfully executed. But Jordan was operating at a level that was, in the specific context of isolation basketball, simply beyond what Magic could match. It was not a question of effort or will or competitive desire. It was a question of what Jordan had been built for. His entire game, every component of it, had been optimized over years of obsessive refinement for exactly this kind of situation. The mid-range game that nobody in basketball history has ever executed with his consistency. The footwork that created space from nothing. The defensive intensity that never relented even when he was also the primary offensive option. The capacity to read a defender's tendencies within the first 3 or 4 possessions, and then exploit those tendencies with a precision that felt almost analytical. Jordan went ahead by 4, with about 10 minutes remaining, and never let the margin close back to fewer than 2. He won by 6. The final point came on a pull-up jumper from the right elbow. The same shot he had been making all evening. The same shot he made in games, in practices, in every context the game presented to him. He made it the same way each time. The same elevation, the same release point, the same result, with a consistency that was itself a kind of argument. Magic contested it well. It went in anyway. The arena was silent for almost 4 full seconds after the ball went through the net. 8,000 people who had been watching with total absorption found themselves at the end of something they did not yet have words for. Then the applause started, and it built quickly into something sustained and genuine that lasted for nearly 2 minutes. It was not applause for a winner. It was applause for what both men had given to everyone in that building, the rarest thing in professional sports, which was an honest and unmediated look at what greatness actually is when all the surrounding structures are removed. Magic stood with his hands on his knees for a moment, breathing. Then he stood up straight and walked toward Jordan, and the two men embraced in the way that competitors embrace after something real has happened between them. Magic said something into Jordan's ear that nobody around them could hear. Jordan laughed, genuinely, the full laugh that was different from his competitive expression, and nodded. Whatever was said belonged to them. In the years that followed, both men were asked about that evening in various interview contexts. Magic was characteristically generous in the way he described it. He said that he had learned something specific about Jordan in those 25 minutes that he had suspected but not fully understood from competing against him in team settings. He said that Jordan's individual skills were not just excellent within the context of basketball. They were the reason basketball at its highest level looked the way it looked. That the game had shaped itself around what Jordan could do, and that understanding that changed how he thought about competition and about what the highest expression of individual excellence in a team sport actually meant. Jordan said less, as he usually did when the subject was his own greatness. He said that competing against Magic in any context was one of the genuine pleasures of his career. He said that Magic had made shots in those 25 minutes that very few players in the world could have made under that kind of pressure. And then he said something that the interviewer noted seemed to carry more weight than the words themselves, which was that the best competition he had ever experienced was always the competition where he did not know in advance how it would end. He said those moments were the ones that made him understand why he played. The significance of what happened that evening was not reducible to the final score. It was not a championship. It was not a playoff series. It was not even a game that would appear in any official record anywhere. What it was, for everyone who witnessed it, was a clarification. It clarified something about the nature of individual greatness in basketball that the team game, with all its variables and context and surrounding noise, made it difficult to see plainly. It showed that there was a level of skill in Jordan's game that expressed itself most purely in exactly this kind of stripped-down context. where there was nowhere to hide and nothing to hide behind, and the only question on the floor was the most fundamental question basketball has to offer, which is whether you can score on this person who is trying to stop you and stop this person who is trying to score on you. Magic Johnson answered that question as well as almost anyone who ever played the game could have answered it. Jordan answered it at a level that silenced 8,000 people for 4 seconds at the end, which is the basketball equivalent of a held breath before applause, the moment when the body processes something extraordinary before the mind finds a way to respond to it. That silence was the most honest review either of them would ever receive. It lasted 4 seconds and it said everything.